Bound by Fire. The Rancher's Trial Among the Apache. Samuel Hayes woke up before sunrise, as he did every morning, to the soft whistle of the wind brushing across the open plains. The smell of damp earth mixed with hay filled the air, and the first rays of sunlight painted the horizon with a pale golden light. His small cabin, built by his father decades ago, stood alone on the edge of the ranch, with rolling fields of tall grass stretching toward the distant mountains. It was a quiet, isolated life, but one Samuel had always cherished. Here, he was in control. Here, he was home. The ranch was more than a piece of land to Samuel. It was a symbol of his family's perseverance. His father had fought through droughts, harsh winters, and raids to build it, and Samuel had grown up learning the value of hard work and patience. He knew every hill, every creek, every path where the cattle wandered. The animals were like family, and caring for them required a strength that was both physical and mental. Even now he could hear the low bellowing of cows from the far pasture, a gentle reminder that life on the ranch never stopped. Samuel pulled on his worn leather boots and stepped outside, the chill of the morning biting his face. His dog, a loyal border collie named Rust, padded at his heels, tail wagging. Together they walked toward the main barn, where the horses and cattle waited. The barn was the heart of the ranch, a place where work and life intertwined. Samuel ran his hand over the smooth wood of the barn's railing, feeling the grooves carved by years of use, as if the walls themselves held the memories of his family's struggles and victories. Today was a day like any other, yet Samuel felt a subtle tension in the air. Lately, rumors of Apache scouts moving closer to the settlement had reached him. He had lived on this land all his life and knew the stories of conflict between settlers and the native Apache tribes. It was a delicate balance. One wrong step could spark trouble. Samuel, however, believed that careful attention and respect for boundaries could prevent disaster. Still, the knowledge of potential danger lingered in the back of his mind. He began the morning chores with a rhythm he had perfected over the years. The cattle needed feeding, the fences required checking, and the horses had to be prepared for the day. Samuel worked methodically, moving from one task to the next, feeling a quiet satisfaction in completing each job well. Rust followed him tirelessly, herding the animals and keeping an eye on their movements. The simplicity of this routine brought comfort, yet Samuel could not shake the feeling that the day would bring more than routine. By mid-morning, Samuel was already in the fields, examining the cattle grazing near the creek. The sun had climbed higher, warming the land and casting long shadows over the rolling hills. Samuel noticed a few cows wandering close to the edge of the property, near the line where his land ended and the Apache territory began. He frowned, knowing the importance of staying respectful of that invisible boundary. His father had always warned him that peace depended on awareness and careful attention. A single mistake could set off a chain of events that would be difficult to control. Samuel whistled softly, calling the cows back, and Rust barked in agreement. As the animals began to move toward the barn, Samuel's mind wandered. He thought about the stories he had grown up hearing, tales of settlers who had lost everything because they ignored warnings. He thought about the Apache, not as enemies, but as a proud people defending their lands. There was fear in those stories, but also respect. Samuel understood that survival on the frontier was not just about strength. It was about wisdom, caution, and knowing when to act. As the morning passed, Samuel took a moment to rest under the shade of a large oak tree. The wind carried the distant sound of drums from a settlement miles away, and he could almost imagine the lives of people living on the other side of the plains.
He sipped water from a tin cup and let the sun warm his face.
Despite the peaceful surroundings, there was an underlying tension that never fully left the air. Life on the edge of the frontier demanded constant alertness. One could never afford to be careless. Samuel's thoughts turned to his family. Though he lived alone on the ranch now, his siblings had chosen different paths. Some stayed in towns, others had moved further west. His parents were gone, leaving him to maintain the ranch on his own. The responsibility weighed heavily on him, but he also felt a deep pride. The ranch was more than land. It was a testament to the sacrifices of generations, but he wanted to honor that legacy, not just for himself, but for the memory of those who had come before him. By afternoon, the work of the ranch had filled Samuel's day with both physical effort and reflection. He repaired broken fence posts, led the cattle back into secure pastures, and tended to the horses, brushing their coats until they shone in the sunlight. Each task reminded him of the delicate balance between life and survival here on the frontier. Even a small oversight, a weak fence, a wandering cow, a forgotten tool, could have serious consequences. Samuel felt the weight of that knowledge with every movement he made. As evening approached, Samuel stood atop a small hill, looking out over the vast expanse of his land. The sky turned shades of orange and pink, and the mountains in the distance became dark silhouettes. It was breathtaking, but also humbling. He realized that, despite his efforts, much of life here was beyond his control. Nature, the movements of animals, the actions of neighbors, and the presence of the Apache, all were forces that shaped his existence. Samuel understood that life was fragile, and respect for that fragility was essential. That night, Samuel sat by the fire in his cabin, the flames flickering shadows across the walls. He ate a simple meal, thinking about the day's work and the challenges yet to come. The wind howled outside and rust lay at his feet, ears perked for any sound. Samuel knew the frontier was beautiful, but it was also dangerous. Every day required vigilance, courage, and intelligence. The Apache were a constant reminder of the unseen line that separated safety from peril. He respected their presence, even if he did not fully understand their ways. As he drifted toward sleep, Samuel could feel the tension of the coming days pressing in on him. He knew that life on the ranch was about more than surviving the weather or tending cattle. It was about understanding the land, the people who shared it, and the delicate balance between freedom and danger. He did not yet know what trials awaited him, but a quiet determination filled him. He would face whatever came with the same resilience and courage that had carried his family for generations. In the quiet of the night, Samuel Hayes remained awake for a little longer, staring at the stars above the plains. Each twinkle seemed like a reminder of the vast world beyond his ranch, full of challenges, unknowns, and the possibility of learning something new about himself and the people around him. He was a man bound to the land, shaped by his past, and ready for the trials that lay ahead. The horizon held both promise and danger, and Samuel knew that tomorrow, life would demand every ounce of his skill, courage, and wisdom. The morning sun had just begun to rise over the plains when Samuel Hayes mounted his horse, feeling the familiar weight of responsibility settle on his shoulders. The previous day had been long and exhausting, yet he had slept poorly, disturbed by uneasy thoughts about the Apache scouts rumored to be near his land. Even though no conflict had occurred yet, a sense of tension clung to the air like the morning mist. Samuel's instincts, honed by years of life on the frontier, told him that peace was fragile and easily broken. He rode toward the northern pastures where a few of his cattle had strayed near the border of Apache territory. The land here was wild and untamed, with tall grass swaying in the morning breeze and scattered patches of rocky soil. Samuel guided his horse carefully, eyes scanning the horizon for any movement, any hint of danger. Rust ran alongside him, her sharp eyes constantly on alert. Samuel had learned to trust his dog's instincts, knowing she could sense things he might overlook. As he approached the cattle, Samuel noticed something unusual. A small group of cows stood at the edge of a creek that marked the boundary of the land claimed by the Apache. They grazed quietly, unaware of the delicate situation. Samuel frowned. He knew that allowing them to wander any further could provoke anger, yet he also knew that moving the animals too quickly could make them scatter. Patience was needed, along with a careful hand. By Samuel whistled softly, and the cattle began to move toward him, guided by Rust's herding skills. But then he saw a flash of movement in the distance, a small group of figures watching him from atop a ridge. His heart tightened. Apache scouts. They were watching, silently and deliberately. Samuel felt a chill run down his spine. He knew that any misstep now could ignite a serious conflict. He spoke quietly to himself, as if to calm his own nerves. Easy now, don't rush, don't make a mistake. He guided the cattle slowly, keeping his movements deliberate and non-threatening. The Apache scouts did not make any move, but their eyes seemed to follow every step. But Samuel realized that the line between caution and fear was thin. He had always respected the Apache, but seeing them so close made the situation real in a way stories never could. Breaths. Suddenly, one of the younger scouts stepped forward, holding a hand up in a gesture of warning. Samuel stopped immediately, raising his own hand to show he meant no harm. For a tense moment, the wind seemed to hold its breath. He wished he could communicate more than words aloud, wishing that respect alone could prevent disaster. But the frontier was not a place of wishes. It was a place of action, consequences, and the delicate understanding of others' boundaries. After what felt like an eternity, the scout gestured for Samuel to move his cattle back, away from the border. Breaths. Samuel obeyed, slowly guiding the animals to a safer part of his land. His heart pounded with relief, but he knew this was only a temporary solution. The tension was still there, simmering like a hidden fire ready to flare. He understood that the presence of the scouts was a clear signal. The Apache were alert, protective, and ready to defend their land, if necessary. Returning to the barn, Samuel tried to shake off the unease. He busied himself with mending broken fences and preparing feed, yet his thoughts kept returning to the encounter. He considered the delicate nature of life on the edge of Apache territory. He knew that settlers who failed to respect these boundaries often paid a steep price, sometimes with their lives or the loss of everything they owned. Bray. Samuel had always prided himself on his carefulness, but today reminded him that even the careful could be caught unprepared. Later in the afternoon, Samuel's neighbor, a man named Jacob, rode over with news. "There's talk of a bigger group moving closer," Jacob said, his face grim. "They've been watching the cattle drives, and some say they're unhappy with settlers near their land." Samuel listened quietly, absorbing the weight of the warning. It confirmed what he had already suspected. Tension was growing, and patience alone might not prevent conflict. Samuel spent the rest of the day planning. He walked the fences, checking for weak spots, and inspected his livestock carefully. He considered the possibility of sending some cattle further south to reduce risk, but he knew that moving too many at once could draw unwanted attention. He also thought about the people who depended on him, the neighboring settlers who traded cattle, the local town that relied on his supplies. Every decision carried consequences, and every choice required balancing risk and practicality. As evening fell, the sky turned shades of deep orange and purple. Samuel built a small fire outside the cabin, hoping the warmth and light would keep him alert through the night. He could hear Rust's low growl as she patrolled the perimeter, ears twitching at every sound. The plains were quiet, yet Samuel felt the weight of unseen eyes watching him still. He knew that the Apache scouts would remain nearby for days, if not longer, observing, testing, and waiting for mistakes. The frontier demanded constant vigilance, and Samuel was learning that even the simplest misstep could lead to disaster. That night, Samuel tried to sleep, but his mind raced with possibilities. He thought about the lessons his father had taught him: respect, caution, and understanding the land and its people required more than physical strength. It required intelligence, empathy, and an awareness of forces beyond one's control. The Apache were not enemies in the traditional sense. They were guardians of their land, as he was a guardian of his own. Understanding that distinction was crucial, but difficult when fear and pride were involved. In the days that followed, Samuel continued to encounter signs of tension. Small tracks near the creek, distant drumbeats carried by the wind, and occasional shadows moving across ridges all reminded him that the land was shared, contested, and alive with watchful eyes. Samuel responded with patience and caution, never making sudden moves, always keeping a careful balance between protecting his ranch and avoiding unnecessary provocation. Each encounter taught him more about vigilance, respect, and the complexities of life on the frontier. But tension grew as the Apache scouts became bolder, moving closer to the grazing areas. Samuel began to understand that misunderstandings could escalate quickly. One day, while repairing a fence near the border, he noticed a group of scouts signaling to one another. Mistaking their gestures as a challenge, one of Samuel's hired hands shouted, startling the cattle. The animals stampeded, and Samuel rushed to calm them, heart pounding. The scouts observed, and for a moment, Samuel feared that this small accident might ignite the very conflict he had been trying to prevent. Ravendeer, taking a deep breath, Samuel approached the scouts carefully, waving his hands to show peace. To his relief, they did not respond with aggression, only watchful eyes. In that tense moment, Samuel realized that life on the edge of Apache territory was a constant test of patience, judgment, and restraint. Every movement mattered. Every decision could tip the balance between peace and chaos. The frontier was beautiful, wild, and full of lessons, yet it was also unforgiving. By the end of the week, Samuel had begun to adapt to this new reality. He learned to read subtle signals, the way the scouts moved, the patterns of the wind, the sounds of distant animals. He adjusted his routines, moving cattle with greater caution and keeping his presence respectful but firm breath. Samuel also began to reflect on the importance of understanding those he feared. The Apache were not simply obstacles. They were people with their own traditions, fears, and rights. Baby
Learning to navigate this truth became as essential as any physical task on the ranch. As the sun set on another tense day, Samuel stood on a hill, looking out at the vast plain stretching toward the horizon.
He knew that life here would never be simple. The challenge of balancing survival, respect, and the safety of his ranch would continue, and the risk of conflict remained high. Yet Samuel felt a quiet determination growing within him. He would face whatever came with courage, intelligence, and a deep respect for the people and land around him. The trial had begun, and Samuel understood that this was only the start of a journey that would test every part of him. The morning sun had barely touched the horizon when Samuel Hayes set out again to check the northern pastures. His mind was heavy with caution, remembering the encounters with Apache scouts the week before. He moved carefully, guiding his horse along well-worn trails, eyes scanning the edges of the tall grass. Rust stayed close, alert and ready. Samuel knew the land better than anyone, yet today an uneasy feeling settled deep in his chest, a warning he could not ignore. As he approached a small creek near the border, Samuel noticed something unusual. The grass along the water's edge had been disturbed, footprints pressed into the soft soil. His heart skipped a beat. He knelt to inspect them, realizing they were not his cattle's tracks. These were human footprints, Apache, unmistakably so. Samuel understood the importance of moving slowly, carefully, and without alarm. He whispered to Rust to stay close, and together they advanced cautiously, trying not to draw attention. Before Samuel could fully process the situation, a sudden movement startled him. Figures emerged from the trees, silent and swift, surrounding him and his horse. Bad. Samuel raised his hands immediately, signaling that he meant no harm. But there was no time for words. In a matter of moments, he was gently restrained and escorted away from his land. Rust barked but stayed close, unwilling to leave him. But Samuel felt a rush of fear and disbelief. He had always respected the Apache, but now he was face to face with the reality of their vigilance. The journey was quiet, except for the sound of hooves and footsteps on soft earth. Samuel walked beside the Apache, observing everything, the way they moved with careful precision, the way their eyes scanned the horizon constantly. There was no anger in their gestures, only a firm sense of duty and caution. Samuel realized that he had crossed an invisible line, even unintentionally, and that the consequences of life on the frontier were now very real. By midday, they reached a small settlement nestled in a hidden valley. The Apache camp was simple but organized, with sturdy shelters, communal areas, and a warmth that surprised Samuel. Smoke curled from small fires, carrying the scent of cooking meat and herbs. Children played nearby, laughing and chasing one another, while elders watched quietly from shaded areas. Samuel was struck by the sense of community and resilience here, a world so different from his own, yet filled with life and purpose. Samuel was guided to a central area where the elders sat. They looked at him with calm, assessing eyes. Samuel bowed his head in respect, careful to show no signs of fear or defiance. He spoke gently, introducing himself and explaining that he had no intention of causing harm. The elders listened but said little, their silence more powerful than words. Samuel understood that his fate now rested on their judgment, and he felt a mix of fear, humility, and curiosity.
Over the next days, Samuel began to learn the routines of the camp.
He was given simple food and a small place to sleep, always under careful watch. At first, every task seemed unfamiliar and challenging. He helped gather water from a nearby stream, carried firewood, and assisted in small chores. The work was exhausting, but it gave him a sense of purpose. Samuel quickly realized that survival here required adaptation, patience, and respect for the traditions that governed every aspect of life. Samuel also observed the people around him, learning about their skills and resilience. Hunters moved with quiet precision through the hills, gathering game to feed the camp. Women prepared meals and crafted tools, their movements efficient and practiced. Children were taught early to understand the land, the animals, and the lessons of the elders. Samuel marveled at how every action had meaning, how survival depended on cooperation, intelligence, and respect for the environment. This was not a world of chaos, but of careful balance, and Samuel began to see that his own assumptions had been limited. Despite his growing understanding, fear and isolation weighed heavily on him. He missed the familiar sights and sounds of his ranch, the comfort of predictable routines, and the sense of control he had once enjoyed. Nights were the hardest. The camp was alive with sounds he had never experienced. The crackling of fires, the soft murmurs of people, and the distant calls of wildlife. Samuel lay awake, thinking about the fragile line between respect and conflict, and the lessons he needed to learn to survive here. One evening, an elder named Tayanita approached Samuel. She spoke slowly, with calm authority, teaching him about the land and the traditions that guided her people. She explained the importance of boundaries, the sacredness of water sources, and the careful balance between humans and nature. Samuel listened intently, realizing how little he had understood before. He felt a deep sense of respect for her wisdom and for the culture he had once viewed only as a potential threat. Days turned into weeks, and Samuel began to adapt. He learned to move quietly through the forest, to hunt small game, and to gather edible plants safely. He helped with chores around the camp, always showing diligence and humility. Slowly, he earned the trust of some of the younger members, who began to accept his presence and even offered guidance. Samuel realized that understanding was as vital as strength, and respect could open doors that fear and stubbornness could not. One particularly difficult day tested Samuel's endurance. A sudden storm swept across the valley, bringing heavy rain and fierce winds. Samuel had to help secure the shelters, assist in moving food supplies to safety, and tend to the animals in the camp. By the end of the day, he was soaked, exhausted, and covered in mud. Yet he also felt a growing sense of accomplishment. He had survived not just the physical challenge, but the mental and emotional strain of adapting to an unfamiliar world. He realized that resilience was not just about fighting, it was about learning, observing, and respecting the world around him. During these weeks, Samuel also began to reflect on his own life. He thought about his family, his ranch, and the values his father had instilled in him. He realized that many of these lessons, hard work, patience, perseverance, were universal, transcending cultures. While the Apache way of life was different, the principles of respect, care, and responsibility were similar. Samuel felt a quiet gratitude for the chance to learn these lessons firsthand, even under circumstances that had seemed frightening at first. Patient. As the trial of living among the Apache continued, Samuel noticed subtle signs of acceptance. Members of the camp began to speak to him without caution, offering guidance in small tasks that required trust. Samuel responded with humility and effort, understanding that each action, no matter how small, shaped the way he was perceived. He was learning that survival in this world required more than strength. It required humility, observation, and a willingness to grow. By the end of the first month, Samuel had transformed in ways he could not have imagined. He was no longer simply a rancher struggling to protect his land. He had become a student of life, learning lessons in patience, empathy, and respect from people whose world he had only glimpsed before. The experience tested his courage, reshaped his understanding, and prepared him for the challenges that lay ahead. He knew that the frontier would continue to demand every ounce of his skill, intelligence, and humility, but he also understood that these trials were shaping him into a stronger, wiser man. Weeks had passed since Samuel Hayes first arrived at the Apache camp, and he had begun to notice subtle changes in the way people treated him. What had started as cautious observation now included small gestures of trust. A young hunter would sometimes call to him from across the ridge, sharing information about the trails or the location of fresh water. A few of the women nodded to him with recognition as he passed by, acknowledging his efforts in helping carry firewood or prepare meals. These small signs filled Samuel with cautious hope. He had learned quickly that understanding the people around him required patience, humility, and careful observation. Each action, each word, each expression carried meaning. One morning, Tayanita, the elder woman who had first guided him, called him over to help with a hunting preparation. "Watch closely," she instructed, her tone firm but patient. "The land speaks if you know how to listen. Every step matters."
Samuel followed her guidance carefully, observing the movements of the hunters, the placement of traps, and the subtle signals of the land.
Through these experiences, Samuel began to see the depth of wisdom in their traditions. The Apache were not just defending territory, they were guardians of knowledge passed down through generations. They understood the land, the animals, and the delicate balance that allowed life to continue even in harsh conditions. Samuel felt a growing admiration and respect. He realized that the frontier was not simply a place to survive, but a place to learn lessons about resilience, community, and connection to the world. As the days turned into weeks, Samuel's confidence grew. He began to assist in hunting trips, carefully following instructions and demonstrating patience. At first he had clumsy attempts, tripping over roots or startling small animals, but the hunters did not scold him harshly. Instead, they offered guidance and encouragement. Slowly, he learned how to move silently, how to read the tracks of animals, and how to anticipate the patterns of nature. Each success, however small, strengthened his sense of belonging in the camp. Samuel also spent time helping with the communal tasks of daily life. He helped carry water from the stream, repaired shelters damaged by storms, and assisted in preparing food. Through these efforts, he began to understand the interconnectedness of the people and the land.
Every action had purpose. Every person's contribution mattered.
Samuel began to realize that his previous understanding of survival on the frontier had been incomplete. It was not only about personal strength or property. It was about respect, cooperation, and harmony with the natural world. One evening, as the sun dipped below the mountains, Samuel sat near the fire with Tianita. She spoke of the values that guided her people: respect for life, patience, courage, and balance.
Best. You are learning, she said softly, but learning is not enough.
Understanding must guide your actions. Only then will you truly belong. Samuel listened, reflecting on how much he had grown in such a short time. He felt a deep sense of gratitude for the chance to learn these lessons, knowing that they would shape him forever. As Samuel became more comfortable, he also began to form connections with individual members of the camp. A young hunter named Chemo often accompanied him on excursions, teaching him how to find safe paths and avoid dangers. They shared stories of their lives. Samuel spoke of the ranch, his family, and the challenges of his world, while Chemo spoke of the land, the animals, and the lessons of his people. Breaths. Through these exchanges, Samuel began to see the humanity that connected them, despite differences in culture and experience. Trust grew gradually. The elders began to allow Samuel small responsibilities that required judgment and care. He was asked to assist in managing livestock that the camp kept, helping to move them to safer grazing areas during storms. He learned how to make decisions that balanced the needs of the animals with the safety of the people. Each success reinforced the elders' trust and Samuel's confidence. He felt a quiet pride, not in his own skill alone, but in the fact that he could contribute meaningfully to a community that had once been strangers. One day, a serious test arrived unexpectedly. A group of scouts from another settlement moved near the camp's boundaries, unaware of the delicate understanding that had been established.
Samuel was asked to help alert the elders and guide a plan to avoid confrontation.
His knowledge of settler behavior became invaluable. Using careful observation and strategic thinking, Samuel helped the camp move livestock to safe areas and ensured that the approaching group passed without incident. The elders recognized his wisdom and quick thinking, a moment that solidified his place within the community. Through these experiences, Samuel realized that his time in the camp was teaching him lessons he could never have learned on his own ranch. He was learning the importance of listening, of observing before acting, and of understanding motivations that differed from his own. He began to see that respect was not passive. It required active effort and awareness. But each day was a lesson in humility, patience, and collaboration. Samuel also began to notice changes within himself. The fear and anxiety he had felt upon arrival were giving way to confidence, respect, and a sense of responsibility. He was no longer simply a captive or an outsider. He was part of a complex, living community. He took pride in the tasks he performed, the knowledge he gained, and the trust he earned. Samuel realized that his understanding of the frontier had expanded. It was no longer just a struggle for survival, but a journey of growth and connection. By the time several months had passed, Samuel had formed a tentative alliance with the Apache. The elders spoke to him with trust rather than caution, and young members included him in discussions about planning and resource management. He had proven himself through effort, respect, and consistent action. Samuel felt a quiet satisfaction in knowing that he had earned his place, not through force or argument, but through understanding and cooperation. Evenings in the camp became a time of reflection for Samuel. He would sit by the fire, listening to stories of the past, tales of ancestors who had faced hardships and learned the ways of the land. He shared stories of his own family, of the ranch, and of the challenges he had faced before arriving in the camp. Through these exchanges, a bridge formed between two worlds, built on shared experience, trust, and mutual respect. Samuel began to see the possibility of peace extending beyond the camp. He realized that understanding and communication could prevent conflicts and foster cooperation. The lessons he was learning would not only help him survive, but could also guide others toward respect and collaboration across cultures. He understood that the frontier was not merely a place of danger, but also a place of connection, learning, and growth. As the sun rose and set over the mountains, day after day, Samuel's bond with the Apache deepened. He had moved from fear to understanding, from suspicion to trust. The trial he had faced was no longer just about survival. It was about learning to see the world through another's eyes, to act with wisdom, and to value life in all its forms. Grasp. Samuel felt a profound transformation within himself, a growing sense of purpose and connection that he knew would shape the rest of his life. By the end of this chapter of his life, Samuel Hayes had become more than a rancher captured on the edge of Apache territory. He had become a learner, a participant, and a bridge between worlds. The Apache had taught him lessons that went beyond survival, shaping him into a man who understood courage, patience, respect, and the true meaning of community. Though the journey was far from over, Samuel now faced the future with a new sense of confidence, hope, and wisdom. The morning air was crisp and clear as Samuel Hayes mounted his horse for the first time in months without fear or hesitation. The journey back to his ranch was filled with a strange mixture of excitement and quiet reflection. Every hill, every stream, and every tree seemed both familiar and different. The lessons he had learned during his time among the Apache lingered in his mind, shaping the way he looked at the land he had once taken for granted. He understood now that ownership was more than a claim. It was a responsibility, not just to the land, but to all who shared it.
As he rode through the plains, memories of his time in the Apache camp returned vividly. He recalled the mornings spent learning to read tracks, the evenings listening to stories by the fire, and the quiet patience required to survive in harmony with nature.
He thought about Tayanita, Kimo, and the elders who had guided him, and a deep sense of gratitude filled him. The fear that had once gripped him was gone, replaced by a steady confidence and a clear understanding of his place in the world. The ranch appeared on the horizon, its familiar buildings and fences standing strong against the backdrop of mountains and rolling grasslands. Brask. Samuel's heart lifted, yet he noticed things he had once overlooked. The way certain sections of the land had grown wild, the way the creek curved differently after seasonal rains, and the subtle tracks of animals that moved freely across the plains. The land was alive, and Samuel felt a renewed sense of responsibility to care for it, not only as a rancher but as a guardian. Upon arriving, Samuel found his ranch largely intact, though some fences had been damaged by storms, and a few cattle had wandered further than expected. His initial instinct was to hurry and fix everything immediately, but he paused, recalling the lessons of patience and observation he had learned. He studied the land carefully, noting the most effective ways to repair the fences, guide the cattle, and manage his resources without unnecessary stress or waste. The Apache had taught him that careful planning and respect for natural rhythms were more powerful than haste or force. Samuel began the process of restoring the ranch with methodical precision. He repaired broken fences, guided the cattle back to safe pastures, and tended to the horses. Each task reminded him of the balance between effort and understanding. He applied the skills he had learned in the camp: observation, patience, and respect to every action. What had once been mundane chores now felt like meaningful exercises in stewardship. The ranch was no longer just his property. It was a living system that required care, attention, and empathy. Neighbors and townspeople who had once only seen Samuel as a hard-working but cautious rancher noticed a change in him. His movements were deliberate, his demeanor calm yet confident. He spoke with a new wisdom, offering advice and sharing insights about the land, the seasons, and the care of livestock. People began to seek his guidance, sensing that he had grown in ways that extended beyond physical skill. Samuel understood that the trial he had faced among the Apache had not only strengthened him, but had also given him the ability to help others navigate the challenges of frontier life. Over time, Samuel reached out to the Apache to establish communication and cooperation. He sent messengers to explain his respect for their land, his desire to avoid conflict, and his willingness to share knowledge and resources peacefully. The elders responded positively, acknowledging his efforts and expressing a willingness to maintain understanding and cooperation. Samuel felt a sense of relief and pride. The lessons he had learned, humility, observation, and respect, had allowed him to bridge two worlds that had once seemed impossible to reconcile. Life on the ranch gradually returned to a steady rhythm, but Samuel was changed in ways that went beyond routine tasks. He began to notice details he had previously ignored: the subtle tracks of deer along the creek, the quiet movements of birds signaling the coming of rain, and the delicate patterns in the growth of plants and grass. These observations allowed him to anticipate changes and act in ways that protected both his livestock and the land. He realized that understanding the natural world was as important as understanding people, and that wisdom came from attention and care, not just strength or determination. Samuel's family, though they had not been present during his capture and trial, noticed a transformation in him as well. Letters from his siblings and friends often mentioned his newfound calmness and insight. Even his dog Rust seemed to recognize the difference, moving with him confidently and responding to his quiet commands with unwavering trust. The bond between Samuel, his land, and his community had deepened, reflecting the growth he had undergone. One afternoon, while standing atop a hill overlooking his ranch, Samuel reflected on the journey he had endured. He thought about the fear, uncertainty, and struggle that had marked the early days of his capture. He remembered the long hours of observation, the careful learning of new skills, and the moments of trust he had built with the Apache. All of these experiences had reshaped him, teaching him lessons that could not be learned from books or stories. He understood that true strength lay not only in action but also in empathy, patience, and the ability to see the world from another's perspective. Samuel also thought about the broader implications of his experience. The frontier was a place of potential conflict, but it was also a place of learning and connection. By respecting boundaries, seeking understanding, and fostering cooperation, he could prevent unnecessary struggles and build relationships that benefited everyone. This realization brought him a sense of purpose that extended beyond the daily tasks of ranching. He was no longer just a man protecting his land. He was a bridge between worlds, carrying lessons of respect and understanding to those around him. As seasons passed, Samuel continued to apply the wisdom he had gained. He worked the land with renewed care, communicated respectfully with neighboring Apache bands, and guided younger settlers in ways that encouraged cooperation rather than conflict. His ranch thrived, not only because of hard work, but because of the knowledge he had gained about balance, patience, and observation. Samuel understood that every action had consequences, and he acted with intention, guided by the lessons of his trial. Evenings at the ranch were a time of reflection and gratitude. Samuel would sit by the fire watching Rust rest nearby and think about the journey that had brought him to this point. He remembered the trials, the lessons, and the people who had shaped him, from the Apache elders to the young hunters who had shared their knowledge. He understood that the fire he had faced, both literal and metaphorical, had refined him, making him stronger, wiser, and more compassionate. In the end, Samuel Hayes became more than just a rancher surviving on the edge of the frontier. He became a man shaped by trial, experience, and the wisdom of those who had taught him the value of respect, patience, and understanding. His ranch flourished, not only as land and livestock, but as a reflection of his growth, a testament to the lessons he had learned. The people around him recognized the change, and the Apache acknowledged the bridge he had built between worlds. Samuel knew that life would continue to hold challenges, but he also knew that he was better prepared than ever to face them. He had learned that survival was not simply about strength or courage. It was about wisdom, empathy, and the ability to act with care and foresight. The trials he had endured among the Apache had taught him that life's greatest lessons often come from the places we least expect, and that understanding others was as essential as understanding ourselves. As the sun set over the plains, casting long shadows across the rolling hills, Samuel Hayes felt a quiet sense of fulfillment. He had faced fear, uncertainty, and trial, and had emerged stronger, wiser, and more connected to the land and people around him. The horizon remained vast and full of possibility, but he now faced it with confidence, respect, and the knowledge that true strength came from understanding, patience, and the courage to grow.